Hi, good evening to all of you. So we are continuing with our YouTube classes on Unacademy platform. So today, as part of our classes, we will be continuing with the discussion of General Studies Polity Governance paper. We have seen 4 questions yesterday. Today, let us proceed and look at other questions. Before starting our discussion, as usual, let us start with the courses offered on Unacademy platform. What are the courses that are offered on Unacademy platform? As you can see it on your screen here, in those who are preparing for a 2023 CSE, they have this introductory offer wherein you can get additional 10% discount on 18-month combo. Combo means it is both general studies and public optional. And the original price is 78,999. Now it is only 63,898. You can see almost more than 15,000 rupees discount. Right? This offer is valid only till 19th of January. So you can immediately take admission. You can take admission with our code also. Wherein you'll get a 10% additional discount. Right, with our code PKS10. Then what are the benefits that you'll be getting? You have the books, and then of course the batches will be starting from 19th of January, and you will also have the test series also as part of these classes which are given to you. You can see these are all the top rankers of Unacademy in the last year, including AR2, and then there are 7 rankers in between 1 and 20, and 20 rankers in between 20 and 100, and overall 143 rankers. The batches you can see here that these batches are starting from 19th of January. The batches are all starting from 19th of January. If you are taking combo subscription, you will be getting 20 GS booklets also. Mission 2022, Lakshya 2022, like this. So you have batches, and these are all the optional courses that are launched in that will be launched in the month of January. You can see all of them, right? And these are all the benefits with your Unacademy subscription. You can see that live mentoring is there. You have study planner, open house with educators. You can get loans with 0% interest rates. There will be no processing fee, flexible tenure, and minimal paperwork. And then on 16th January, we have this UPSC CSE combat, wherein in 1 hour you are expected to answer 56 questions, and those who come out on the top between rank 1 to 3, they will get 100% scholarship, and there are other scholarships for other ranks also. Right? These are all the courses. You can use our code PKS10 to enroll for this UPSC CSE combat. Right? So this is what is there on Unacademy platform. Let us come back and look at what we were discussing yesterday. So we have seen this question, constitutional morality question. We have already seen. Then we have also seen this question about desirability of greater representation to women. Then we have seen the question related to parliament also. So we have to look at this question, pressure groups, right? This is where we stopped yesterday. Let us see what is the question here. Pressure groups play a vital role in influencing public policy making in India. Explain how. The business associations contribute to public policies. Again, what you must remember here is that these are all what we call analytical questions, right? How business groups are contributing to public policies. Before coming to this question, let us have a little bit of a slight introduction about this question. How public pressure groups contribute to policy making? As we study in our public administration, you can see that there are various instruments used by the pressure groups to influence public policies. First, they will get their people to elected to positions of power, both legislature as well as executive, so that they can formulate policies that would help them to achieve their targets, objectives. You can see the cost-based associations. You can see religious-based organizations. You can see all other pressure groups actively promoting the interest. They will also bring it to the attention of the policymakers the problems faced by them through various advertisements and through other advertising campaigns. They will also put pressure on the government. These pressure groups also would put pressure on the government by through various instruments like dharnas, hartals, bunds. These are all some of the extreme measures used by the pressure groups. So you can see that in a democracy, at the end of the day, what we say is that if you look at in a democracy, at the end of the day, public policy making is all about politics. That is what we say. So how do you answer the question? That is what you will start your answer with. In a democracy, you say that you start your answer by saying that in a democracy, public policy making is always all about politics. It is all about winning elections and retaining power. It is all about winning elections and retaining power. This public policy making. It is all about politics. So these pressure groups have what we call the influence over their followers, and they are the ones who can decide electoral outcomes also. They can decide electoral outcomes also. So policymakers will always have to take into consideration the demands of these pressure groups while formulating policies. And what we must remember is that in a democracy, policy making is always determined on the basis of this on the basis of this uh, majority opinion of the people. Sometimes a small section of minority also can influence electoral outcomes. Now coming back here, the question is specifically about business associations. How do these business associations influence policy making in India? How do they influence policy making in India? When we say associations influencing policy making in India, what we are talking about here is we are talking about their influence both in positive as well as in negative terms. We are not only talking about positive terms, it also in terms of both positive as well as negative terms. But the question is, how do they influence? That is what it is, right? So, how do they influence? What are the business associations that we have in the first place? What are the business associations that we have in India? We have Association of Chamber of Commerce and Industry, SHM. We have CII, Confederation of Indian Industries. We also have a FICCI, Federation of Indian Chamber of Commerce and Industry. These are the major business associations that we have in India. Now, as we say here, we have to understand the reason why this question was asked. Especially what happened after 1991 is that when we have opted for liberalization, privatization, globalization, we had these business associations that were initially against this LPG because they were working under protectionist policies of the government, and they were able to make good profits because of that. So the Bombay Club, we used to call them as Bombay Club. This Bombay Club was totally against these reforms, but once they have seen the benefits of these reforms, they wholeheartedly supported the reforms, right? And what happens is that every year when the finance minister formulates the budget, finance minister will be holding consultation with these business organizations regarding budgets. Budget is where you find public policies. Budget is the place where we find these public policies, right? Now, what we have seen here is that over a period of time, what we have seen is that as we study again in public policy, please remember you need knowledge of public administration to write good answers to these questions. As I keep on saying, governance questions require definitely good knowledge of public administration. What we have is this elite mass model that we say, if you remember, this is what we say, elite mass model. It is the ruling governing elite which joins hands with the non-governing elite. Governing elite means political executive and bureaucracy. Joining hands with non-governing elite means these business associations. And they would be ultimately formulating the public policies. So, what do? They will be holding continuous discussions with the political executive. These discussions are not ending only at the time of budgets. Budgets, there will be more formal discussions with the business associations regarding finding out their problems, finding out their challenges, what are their obstacles, so that the government can include those things in the public policies, right? For example, as I keep on saying, you have to explain all these things with the examples. For example, what these corporates in India have repeatedly complained with the government is the taxes, especially this corporation tax, corporate tax in India is very high compared to rest of the world. They said that these corporation taxes are so high that they are eating into their profits. They are not able to invest in in a in a, more infrastructure because of this high tax regime. So what did the government of India do? In 2019, the government of India had accepted the demands of these pressure groups, business associations, and they have drastically reduced the corporate taxes. At this point of time, if you look at it, these corporate taxes in India are one of the lowest in the world. And the government had given not one or two, 1.5 lakh crores of rupees of tax relief to these corporates on the basis of the assumption that these corporates would be using that money to invest in the economic system. That is how they are influencing public policies. And then give one more example here. As I said, these kind of questions always have to be answered with examples. That's why we need very good knowledge of current affairs. One more example. Regional Comprehensive Economic Partnership, RCEP, which is a very good thing. And India has these countries, South Asian countries and every other country, countries like Japan, all these countries have strongly wanted India to be part of RCEP. Being India is one of the largest economies in the world, they wanted India to be part of RCEP. But what happened? These business associations, they kept on representing to the government that they do not want India to be part of RCEP. And what did they say? They said that if India were to be part of this RCEP, what would happen? These domestic industry will be adversely impacted. There will be adverse impact on domestic industry because from New Zealand dairy products will come and swamp our entire our domestic markets. New Zealand, a country, such a small country, overall population of New Zealand is only 55 million people, right? Right? And they said that New Zealand, a small country of what is the population of New Zealand, right? The population of New Zealand is less than the population of the main street of Old Rayanagar in Delhi, right? And these business associations, what did they do? They created so much of furor, saying that if we become part of this RCEP, we will have to give more concessions to all the member countries. So we will have to get out of this RCEP. The government came under their influence. Ultimately, the government did not sign this RCEP. They said that Chinese products will swamp our markets and we will not be able to face competition. And this is what we say. They are they are influencing public policies. They are influencing public policies, right? And the government, unfortunately, has come under the influence of these business associations, right? What is happening here is that For the benefit of a few big industrialists, the government is willing to sacrifice the welfare of the entire population also. That is how these business organizations, would they would have undue influence over public policies. Similarly, give one more example. This Atmanirbhar Bharat. What is the essence of this Atmanirbhar Bharat? Self-sufficiency. That means, and the name of self-sufficiency, what the government do? The government is discouraging imports. We say that everything has to be produced in India, and the government has increased the customs and excise duties. The government has increased these customs and excise duties, and who is ultimately who loses out of all these things? Again, the people of the country. This is how they are. And another thing that we say here, is that you know these business associations, they have continuous access to the corridors of power. Automatically, they influence public policies more than anyone else. They influence public policies. One more example you can give. If the government is spending around 70,000 crores of rupees on NRIGA, right? The government is giving 5 lakh crores of rupees of tax subsidies to these rich business organizations. Everything is done in the name of what we call growth and development of the country. That is how they are influencing public policies. They are influencing. And again, these business organizations will keep on telling the government to cut down the fiscal deficits. They do not want the government to give any kind of subsidies. They do not want the government to give any kind of implement welfare measures. That is what they are doing. So at the end of the day, what is happening here is that in India, these business associations, what they are looking at is only, their own selfish interests, and that is where we talk about in public policy. If you remember, with these are things we have spoken about in our, public administration classes also. That is where we said that this corporate lobbying had become a very powerful instrument, especially in the hands of these business organizations to get public policies framed by the executive that would ultimately favor them only. And then after writing all these things, then you have to come up with some solutions also. What is the solution that we are talking about here? What is the solution that we have to talk about here? What we have said is that the solution lies in making these discussions more transparent, making the discussions more transparent, and involving them institutionally in public policy formulation. That is what we said. That is what second ERC also has recommended. You have to end your answer with Second Administrative Reforms Commission recommendations. What second ERC has suggested is that the government must institutionalize the relationship with these NGOs and civil society organizations and everyone else pressure groups, so that they would also become an integral part of public policies. And that is what you have to write here as part of answer to this question. Right? Is it fine? If you have any doubts, you can ask. Otherwise, I can move on to the next question. Any doubts? What is it informal? Ketan Anand, everything is informal. When it comes to pressure groups, NGOs, civil society organizations, everything is informal. Everything is informal only. There is nothing formal about it. And that is the reason why what we have said is that let us make it more formal by involving all of them in public policy formulation. And how to do this? As we have said, this can be done through what we study in public administration, again, new public governance, multi-actor paradigm. That is what we have said. How can this be done? through new public governance in a multi-actor paradigm, right? That is what you have to write as part of solution. So, shall we move on to the next question? Right? Okay. Let us move on to the next question. Besides being a moral imperative of welfare state, primary health structure is a necessary precondition for sustainable development. The question says, besides being a moral imperative of welfare state, primary health structure is a necessary precondition for sustainable development. As usual, first we have to understand the question. Understanding the question becomes important. Of course, the first part of the question says that it is the moral responsibility of the government to take care of the health of the people. Health of people. It is a moral responsibility. As part of a welfare state, the government has to take care of the basic minimum needs of the people. Right to life and live is a part of fundamental right also, Article 21. So, the right to have a good life, healthy life is also part of our fundamental rights. So, it is the responsibility of the government, moral responsibility of the government to take care of the health needs of the people. Second part of the question says, this primary health structure is a necessary precondition for a sustainable development also. It is also a necessary precondition for sustainable development also. What does the second part of the question says here? The second part of the question says that it is not only moral imperative, it is also economically rational one for the government to focus on health infrastructure. What do we say here? What are we saying here? What we are saying here is that we have a huge amount of population. India always boasts of what we call a huge amount of population in the working group. But the question that we have to ask here is, are we able to transform this demographic bulge into demographic dividend or not? That is the question that we have to ask. Are we able to transform this demographic bulge into demographic dividend? That is what we have to ask the question. Obviously, we have not. Why? Because to transform this demographic bulge into demographic dividend, we should focus on what is called a social infrastructure. And this social infrastructure includes two things. One, education. Second one is health. That is the reason why you can see question 6 and 7 talk about both education as well as health. Both of them talk about education and health. Right? So if you were in a population to be turned into a productive workforce, the minimum thing that is required is health, both the physical and mental health. And this is necessary for what we call sustainable development. If you have to ensure that your development process is sustained for a long period of time, this is absolutely necessary. And you can never ignore this. Now coming back here, why this question was asked? That is what we always say. Why this question was asked? Because unfortunately, we have completely ignored this health and education. Why? Right? Take the case of a planning process. Between 1947 and 1991, we had a centralized top-down approach to planning, with the government having absolute monopoly over the market economies. Everything was under the direct control and guidance of the government only. Private sector was not at all present. During this period, what did we do? During this period, we have focused more on what we call physical infrastructure. There was huge amount of emphasis on physical infrastructure. Initially, we started with public sector enterprise. In 1960s and 1950s, we focused on irrigation. for agriculture sector. We have constructed so many multi-purpose irrigation dams. Then we again went back to public sector enterprises. That is what Jawaharlal Nehru initially and later Indira Gandhi and rest of the governments also have done. So this entire planning period, from the first 5-year plan to 7th 5-year plan, two sectors were completely ignored, or you can say criminally neglected. What are those sectors? Both health and education. And because of which, we have not been able to transform our demographic dividend into, demographic bulge into demographic dividend. We could not simply. We have a huge amount of population, but which is mostly unskilled and not healthy population also, because they cannot work also, because you require health also. On the other hand, after 1991, we have opted for what we call liberalization, privatization, globalization. And what did we do as part of LPG? Again, unfortunately, we have not given any importance to this health and education. So what did we do? We have, in the name of liberalization, privatization, globalization, the government has completely withdrawn itself from these good key sectors, two key sectors. One is education, second one is health. Some government simply has disappeared from these two sectors with the private sector participation. The government believed that this can be done by the private sector. Again, during this period, what did the government do? This period has witnessed huge amount of increase in the revenues of the government, but instead of focusing on this social infrastructure, successive governments, what they have done, instead of focusing on this key social infrastructure, successive governments have given more importance to providing short-term benefits to the people in the form of subsidies. They never concentrated on this health infrastructure. And what happened here? What happened here? Here, the private sector had come up with a better health infrastructure, but it was mostly restricted to urban cities. They did not penetrate the rural areas, because people do not in the rural areas do not have the capacity. They don't have the income to pay for these health expenses. So private sector did not go into rural areas. It was mostly restricted to urban areas, and it was mostly completely commercialized. That is what happened, and the rural areas continue to suffer. We have in rural areas the so-called primary healthcare centers, but these primary healthcare centers simply never really really performed at the ground level. As we discussed in our classes, what happens here is that an audit was done in Bihar and Uttar Pradesh. In Bihar, when the audit was done, almost 98% of primary healthcare centers were not present at all. Not 1 or 2, 98%. Remaining 2% were not functioning. You can understand the kind of the infrastructure at the local level. And recently, during the Corona crisis, again, an audit was done in Uttar Pradesh to find out whether people have access to this primary health care facilities or not. It was found out that on an average, a villager is forced to walk for at least 20 kilometers to reach to his nearest primary healthcare center. And we in a primary healthcare health structure in India suffers from all these weaknesses. Simply, there is no physical infrastructure in the form of healthcare centers. We don't have any manpower, especially in rural areas. We don't have any doctors. India has one of the lowest people doctor ratio in the world. And more importantly, we never really bother to spend more amount of money on primary health structure. There is not enough amount of money spent by the government on this health infrastructure. Simply not enough amount of money was spent by the government. And in terms of percentage of GDP, India is one of those countries wherein it spends the least amount of money on primary health. In fact, health budgets. Sri Lanka, our neighbors, they spend more amount of money than India. And then whatever that amount of money that we are spending, it is mostly going into what we call subsidies only. Subsidies only. If you look at this scheme also, Pradhan Mantri Jan Arogya Yojana (PMJAY), mostly it is into insurance component. Insurance component is very high, but we have not really bothered to improve what is called primary health infrastructure. That is where the problem is. Then, after coming out with all these problems, the next thing that we have to talk about is solutions. What are the solutions? Let us see what are the solutions. First and foremost, as we say, we must increase the health budget of both the central and state governments, at least to initially 3% of GDP. Since neither the central government nor the state governments are willing to do this, because as we discussed yesterday with 14 Finance Commission recommendations, both the central and state governments are only doing one thing, that is, they are giving more subsidies, political populism. And what did Uttar Pradesh state government do? In 2017, BJP had promised loan waiver of farmers. And after Yogi Adityanath came to power, what did he do? He had cut down the health budget of the state government, especially primary health care. And he had diverted all that money to be spent on this writing of the loans of farmers. This is how health care is being taken by the government, successive government. That is the reason why the solution that we are offering here is that since the state governments and the central government are not willing to do the things in a voluntary manner, it should be not done through a law. Just like we have FRBM legislation, let there be another legislation also, wherein the central and state governments must at least devote 3% of their GDPs only for health infrastructure, and the money should never be diverted for any other purpose. This is the first solution. Now, the next problem is that these outlays are not being transformed into outcomes. You are spending money, but it might not be transformed into outcomes because of massive levels of corruption. Right? Outlays are not transformed into outcomes. What is the solution for this? That is the reason why at the primary health, healthcare centers, the government should follow what is called PPP model, public-private partnerships, or what you call it as a 5P model, public, private, people, panchayat partnerships, right? Wherein the private sector will be providing services. This is same as what you have in National Health Service in United Kingdom, NHS. So what we are saying here is that let the private sector provide health services to the people, and let the panchayats and the people evaluate their performance, social audits. Let the government give money to them. That is what we say, public-private people panchayat partnership. This is what next solution. The third solution that we are offering here is we must focus on preventive healthcare measures. Prevention is completely absent. It is said that if we can, provide safe drinking water to all our citizens in the country, all our people in the country, almost more than 95% of the health problems can be avoided. More than 95% of our health problems can be avoided, provided if we can provide safe drinking water to every citizen. This is where again the government should be focusing on safe drinking water, and then less than contaminated food. Focus on green organic farming. These are all the things that can help in preventing these problems, health problems. Health and wellness centers. The government comes out with very attractive slogans like health and wellness centers, but it is fine. But at the end of the day, you have to implement them. For that, you have to allocate money also. Right? That is what we say here. Next thing is that, as I said, the focus should be on preventive healthcare. That is what the next thing the government can do, should also do. And what is the next solution that we can talk about here for healthcare sector? How to overcome the problem of absence of skilled personnel. Those those who are graduating from medical colleges of the government by getting the subsidy, all those doctors, it should be made mandatory that they should work in rural areas for a certain period of time, so that we have continuous supply of doctors, qualified doctors in rural areas also, and they can be given attractive remuneration also. It does not mean that they must sacrifice. They can be paid attractive remuneration also, so that they are motivated to work in those rural areas. Right? You have to write all these solutions. Right? If any doubt, you can ask me. Otherwise, I can move on to the next question. Any doubt? Yes? Any doubt? Shall I move on to the next question? Which one? How to government? How government will fund them? Simply, Abhishek. That is what I said. Increase the health budget to at least 3% of GDP. You have huge amount of money. If you increase the health budget to 3% of GDP, you have huge amount of money. You don't have to worry about funding them. You have lots of money, right? So there is no need for to think about finances. Increase the health expenditure. Make it mandatory that both central and state governments must spend at least 3% of the GDP on only health sector. Then a lot of money will be there, right? That is what Abhishek I'm saying. Let the government cut down on unnecessary subsidies and divert this money for health sector, right? They are giving so much of unnecessary subsidies. Remove all of them and spend that money on health sector. So then let us move on to the next question. Let us look at the next question. Earn while you learn scheme needs to be strengthened to make vocational education and skill training meaningful. Comment. Right? What do you mean by this? Earn while you learn. Right? What do we say here? The basic problem with our education system is that it has nothing to do with the real life practical experiences. Our education system has a, still we are continuing with Macaulay's education system, Lord Macaulay's education system, wherein the objective was to produce an army of clerks to work for East India Company. They simply don't have any kind of skills to get productive employment in the private sector, right? So what happens here is that after completing their graduation also, even look at it, India has a, if you look at it, if you look at the things here, recently in Madhya Pradesh, the government had come out with some advertisement for a position of gardeners and peons to be working in assembly, and there were around 15 16 positions. Around 10,000 people have 12,000 people have applied, and most of them are postgraduates and doctorates also. They have applied. Why? Because the basic problem with India is this jobless growth, and the so-called skilled personnel also are not able to get jobs, right? So then what happens is that after some point of time it becomes difficult to convince the people also to study also, because they know that after studying a lot also they will not be able to get jobs. So what you must do is that the focus of education system should be to create skills among the people. Again, those who have attended our classes, even I have discussed all these things in the recently only in our classes also. Only last month I think I have discussed all these things as part of education and health. So what do we say here? You know, you must make sure that people are incentivized to study, you must make sure that there is some reason for them to study so that they have the hope of getting job also after they study. That is what it is needed. That is what it should be done also. Now, recently, what the government of India has done, this Ministry of Tourism had come up with this scheme called Earn While You Learn. That means, again, those who have attended our classes, they know that one of the solutions to jobless growth is identifying the sectors where you can get maximum amount of employment. Right now, we are living in the age of artificial intelligence. We are living in the age of robotics, right? We are living in the age of 5G technologies. So what is happening is that even the highly skilled personnel also are losing their jobs if they do not improve their skills. And what about semi-skilled persons? It becomes almost impossible for them to get jobs. In the future is going to be dominated by this artificial intelligence and robotics. Take the case of automobile sector. Now, in the good old days, in automobile sector, this car manufacturing industries, you had hundreds of employees, people, workers working there. Now, what we have is these machines, robots, and they have replaced human beings, and they are more efficient. Obviously, the producers will be opting for them only. They do not want anything else. So, manufacturing sector is also not able to provide the kind of jobs that we expect it to provide. The only sunrise industry when it comes to jobs is tourism sector, because tourism sector has to be labor intensive. So that is the reason why Ministry of Tourism had come out with this scheme called Earn While You Learn. So what they have said is that they would be teaching these young people about the monuments so that they can become the tourist guides and they can also earn money. That is what we call skill education, vocational education, right? And again, this is only what the tourism sector has spoken about. But what we have to do is that we have to expand these kind of schemes. This is what, if you remember in our classes, I have spoken about as part of the solutions. Up to 7th standard, you can have the same classroom education. From 7th to 10th standards, you can have what is called mixed education. The students can be, slowly uh, taught basic skills. As a country develops, what we can see is that there will be a lot of demand for manual, semi-skilled manual labor. What do you mean by the semi-skilled manual labor? For example, drivers, carpenters, electricians, painters. They're all there. So after 10 standards, what you have to do is that 40% only should be for classroom. Remaining 60% should be on teaching them these skills. What we call it as vocational education. Industrial training. What the government can do is government can enter into public-private partnership with the private sector. These colleges, school and schools, these colleges and schools can enter into agreement with the private sector. And this private sector, if you are there, if you are attending 6 days of college, you can have 3 days in the college learning about the theoretical aspects. Remaining 3 days, they can work in these industries, and they will be paid by the private sector, or the government can pay to the private sector on behalf of the students, right? So that once their graduation is over, they are in a position to to employ themselves. This is what we study. What we say is that government cannot create employment. What the government should be doing is government should be creating employers, not creating employment. Take the case of NREGA. NREGA is about creating employment, not about creating employers. How can the government create employers? Only when the government changes its education system. By the time you finish your graduation, you must be in a position to employ yourself, self-employment. As I said, we have all these vocational skills in especially urban areas. If you look at an electrician in an urban area, he easily he earns in a he earns at least 30,000 rupees per month, which is more than enough, right? What is the per capita income of India? 96,000, 98,000 rupees. 30,000 rupees per month means he is earning 3,60,000 rupees, which is at least 4 times the per capita income of India. That is what we say here. Exactly. That is what we say here. How can this be done? As I said, education system. We must make radical changes to our education system. That is what where you can talk about the national education policy also, the recent national education policy. So what we are saying as part of this national education policy, it says that there is no rigidity when it comes to this graduation, doing graduation. You can always take a break from graduation, go back to the industry, come back again and do the graduation also. Go back to the markets, acquire the skills and come back and do graduation also. Another thing as we have discussed here is that, as we have mentioned, if you are in graduation for 3 years, 40% is only classroom, 60% should be focusing on improving skills, providing skills to the people. Not everyone, can become a software engineer. What is required is we need this kind of dignity of labor also. People should also believe that uh, not everyone can get what we call white collar jobs. You instead of seeking employment, you must become an employer. You must be in a position to provide employment to the people, right? Right, exactly. So this is what we say. This is what the government should be doing. The focus should be on, at the end of the graduation, they will be getting the graduation degree, which is absolutely useless one, but they will be getting the diploma in one particular skill also. And through these schemes like Make in India, Skill India, they can get loans and they can become entrepreneurs by themselves rather than looking for employment by the government. And this is possible only when we can drastically change our education system, at least from the 7th standard onwards. After 10th standard, it has to be made mandatory for everyone. Right? That is what the question talks about. So, is it fine? As I said, those who have attended our governance classes, you know, we have discussed all these things. In fact, you can see in our notes also the same statement. The focus should be on vocational education and skill training. Right? Shall we move on to the next question? Yes? Shall we move on to the next question? Rishu, you know, how much did they discuss tourism? Only 2 lines. It has to be broad based. It has to be broad based. I have discussed only from 2 lines. Rest of all the points that I have discussed, you should be writing. Right? Okay. Let us move on to the next question. Let us move on to the next question. What are we saying here? Can the vicious cycle of gender inequality, poverty, and malnutrition be broken through the microfinancing of women SHGs? Explain with examples. In fact, someone has put this in our Telegram group also, wherein I have exactly spoken about the same thing. Right? Right? Wherein we have said that this microfinance self-help groups can help not only in empowering women, it can also help in removing gender inequality, poverty, and malnutrition. Right? Let us try to understand this question in a more detailed manner. Let us try to understand this question in a more detailed manner. So what we are saying here is that in rural areas, the basic problem is that the cost of living has gone up so much that it is almost impossible for only the male member of the family to work and also to take care of the family, all the needs of the family. It has become almost you know impossible for them because of cost of living has increased. If you remember, while discussing about self-help groups, we have spoken about why these self-help groups. According to this survey conducted by these multilateral institutions, multilateral organizations, if a male member of the family is an earning member of the family, he will send only a portion of the money, his income on the family. On the other hand, if a female member of the family is the earning member of the family, she will spend 100% of her income on family only. She will spend that money on providing better nutritious food. She will spend that money on providing education to her children. Ultimately, it will help in removing the poverty also. Right? But as we have mentioned, the basic problem is self-help, with the self-help groups. There are so many problems. The most important problem is the social and cultural limitations that we have seen, especially in North India and other parts of the country. Women are not allowed to come out and work also. And more importantly, the problem is, and more importantly, the problem is these women, there is no safety and security also, especially in these patriarchal societies, wherein women are always treated as objects of pleasure. They're always treated as objects of pleasure. There is so much of sexual exploitation that is taking place against her, which is not even reported also because of this in rural societies. That is the reason why this self-help group movement has not become popular. Another basic problem is the finances. For these self-help groups to sustain themselves for longer periods of time, what is required is finances. Unfortunately, the problem is that the amount of money that they are raising, these self-help groups, is so less that it becomes almost impossible for them to earn any profits. Earn any profits. So, on top of it, most of them are illiterate, poor, backward women. They are ruthlessly exploited by these middlemen, as we discussed in our classes. They are ruthlessly exploited by these middlemen. What do these middlemen do? These middlemen, provide loans at exorbitant rates to these self-help groups. They charge very high rates of interest, and ultimately they work and they come out with their products. And the middlemen, they will buy those products at very cheap rates, and ultimately, they will make huge amount of profits. That is what is happening, and that is the reason why this microfinancing becomes very important. You know, you know, through to self-help groups. These banks and microfinancing institutions, what should they do is that they should come forward and they should provide finances to self-help groups. We gave the examples in our class, if you remember. In states like Andhra Pradesh, Tamil Nadu, Kerala, why these self-help groups, have become so successful? In Andhra Pradesh, we call them as Dwakra groups, DWCRA, Development of Women and Children in Rural Areas. What did the government of Andhra Pradesh do? They were given in a subsidized loans at a very subsidized rates of interest, 25 paise interest, 0.25%, right? Exactly, right? And similarly, in Kerala, it is called Kudumbasri, Kudumbasri self-help groups. And what is common here, whether it is Andhra Pradesh, Tamil Nadu, Kerala, or Karnataka, is that the state governments are more proactive in identifying the problems of self-help groups and giving them financial assistance. Regional rural banks, cooperative credit societies, and in other microfinancial institutions are encouraged to provide loans to the self-help groups at very subsidized rates of interest. Because the basic issue is finances. But as the question says, microfinancing, is it enough? Not at all. It is necessary but not sufficient. Why? Because the government has to do so many other things. What the government should do? Apart from giving them money, which is necessary, apart from ensuring that they have good amount of money, they must be given training in skills so that they can come out with better products. Then the government should also focus on, the government should also focus on giving them, focus on removing the middlemen, especially in terms of the sale of their products. This self-help government should encourage, expand the market for these self-help groups so that they can directly sell their products to the final consumers and make profits also in the process. Is it necessary? Is it sufficient? Again, not. Why? Because these things are necessary. They can result in economic development, but it should not be stopped with economic development. Political empowerment should also be there. As we have discussed, in states like Andhra Pradesh, what we have seen is, in states like Andhra Pradesh, what we have seen is that the government has encouraged the members of the self-help groups to, become part of, to contest elections to local bodies, especially panchayats. And those panchayat bodies that elect these members of self-help groups, unanimously are given financial incentive also. That money can be used to, remove poverty, malnutrition, as well as overcome gender inequality also. Right? That is the reason why, if you look at the social indicators, recently the report also has come up. If you happen to see that report, wherein you could see that in all the social indicators, right, in those states where self-help groups are very active, malnourishment among the children in the South Indian states is far less compared to North Indian states. Similarly, the ability of the South Indian states to remove poverty is much higher than that of North Indian states. And of course, in terms of gender equality also, in South Indian states, you can see that female education, female empowerment, and female participation in workforce is also much higher, which clearly shows that, especially in rural areas, which clearly shows that these self-help groups have definitely succeeded in, you know, overcoming all these problems, the vicious cycle of this inequality, poverty, and malnutrition. But you know, to break this vicious cycle, microfinancing is necessary but not at all sufficient. We need to bring what is called social reforms, cultural reforms. We have to bring in those social and cultural reforms. You must use media and NGOs, civil society organizations, to create awareness among the people that women are an equal partners in the process of growth and development. We must get rid of the patriarchal attitudes, parochial mentality of the people, especially male members in rural areas. We must also, as I mentioned repeatedly, ensure the safety and security of women. That is non-negotiable. The safety and security of women is non-negotiable, right? You can make sure that you can ensure that the self-help groups can be successful only when there is what we call safety and security of women. Then only you can overcome this vicious cycle, right? That is what you have to write for this question. That is what you have to focus on this question. As you can see, all these questions are mostly directly asked from our class notes only. All these questions, right? So if you have any doubts, you can ask from this self-help groups, right? What we have said is that self-help groups should not be seen only through the prism of economic parameters. We must extend the scope of self-help groups for political empowerment and also to remove gender inequalities and also to reduce malnutrition among the children also. That is what we have said. That is when we said that these members of self-help groups should be encouraged to contest elections to local bodies so that they can use the money that the government is giving for various schemes. They can use this money to, you know, for the betterment of their families, especially children and others. Right? So this is what you have to write for this question. If you have any doubts, you can ask me. If you have any doubts, you can ask me. Right? I think the time is also up. It's already 6 o'clock. The time is also up. You can take 1 minute to ask any questions. Otherwise, we can stop it here for today. Right? Tomorrow we will look at ethics paper. Ethics. Tomorrow we will start the ethics paper. I will start with section A, questions of ethics paper tomorrow. Right? Tomorrow and after tomorrow we will do 2 classes of ethics. And after that, again we will come back to essay, polity governance, again ethics. That is what we will be doing. Right? So that should be fine. Tomorrow we are meeting at the same time and we will start ethics paper tomorrow with the section A questions. Right? Till then, take care of yourself.